Homeowners of Reddit, what are the most insane HOA rules you have had to deal with? Story 1. My parents' HOA has a rule that you are not allowed to cut down trees without a permit from them, at any time, for any reason. The first winter they lived there was an ice storm and a tree fell onto the neighbor's deck, taking out his entire deck and the sliding glass door that went from his kitchen to his deck. My dad went over with his chainsaw to help him cut down the tree that was now in his kitchen, and mid-storm, someone from the association heard the chainsaw and came over asking if they had a permit to cut apart the tree in my neighbor's kitchen. IRC. He told them to get bent, and they tried to give him a $1,000 fine for cutting down a tree without a permit. Story 2. My friend's HOA fined him because the flagpole that was already up in his front yard when he purchased the house was too tall. He countered by flying a pirate flag on that flagpole. They are even less happy with the flagpole now. Story 3. Well, currently they are trying to go after me for bushes in my front yard, saying you can't have a fence in your front yard and you must remove the bushes. There's a lady with an actual picket fence in her front yard that is allowed to keep it, but my bushes that were planted by the previous owner about 10 years ago or more have to be removed. Oh, also they put a lien on someone's house for having a boat in the driveway. Meanwhile, someone on the board has had a pop-up camper in their driveway for months. Not even a single notice was given. Story 4. I was threatened with an $85 fine because they claimed my tree was shading the sidewalk by 2. It was such an odd complaint. I just wondered what kind of person was involved with that report. Story 5. My townhome neighborhood has an HOA that covers the exterior of our homes since they all share the same exterior, being connected and whatnot. My front door has developed a rotting spot on the edge, so I sent a claim in for the HOA to replace it. They said the front door does not fall within their definition of the exterior of the home. That's fine, whatever, I'll just buy a new one, but wait, I have to fill out an exterior change request to get a new front door. The door they said doesn't count as exterior, needs an exterior change request sent to approve any external changes made. They want to control what my door looks like, but I have to pay for it. Story 6. I used cool white LED Christmas lights instead of warm white. There was no specifics given in the HOA handbook. After that year it was placed in there. Story 7. In order to sell or rent in my HOA, you must provide HOA docs to the new owner or tenant. They must be bought from the HOA. Otherwise the sale rental is not legal. $200 for a 3-ring binder with 150 pages of poorly photocopied documents. The first page. These documents have not been updated since July 2002. Please see the HOA website for updated documents. Story 8. This was in an apartment complex, but it was still insane. The place I lived in had a 3-strike rule, and the strikes could be for petty. I once got a strike for having a blackout curtain that was slightly visible behind the standard shades that were provided. And I had beach towels hanging on a balcony to dry. They weren't there for more than 10 minutes before I got a notice on my door. All this while my neighbor next door had loud parties every night. Nothing happened. And the last straw was when that same neighbor left a puke-soaked blanket hanging off his balcony for a week straight. And nothing happened. Uloma Palisades. I was once warned about storing my trash in view of the street. I thought to myself, that's funny, I'm pretty on top of the trash, so I checked the date of the infraction. Sure enough, it was trash day. They were upset at me about putting my trash out on trash day. Story 9. I used to live in a HOA. One of the members on the board lived across the street from my neighbor and I. He sent a letter to us saying that we all have to mow the lawn on the same day, at the same cut height, and in the same pattern to create uniformity in the neighborhood. My neighbor and I intentionally cut on different days and in opposite patterns just to annoy the guy. Story 10. I work as an architect in a very HOA-heavy part of Florida, so I have seen some. My favorites are 1. Had an HOA rant and rave about approved colors. They hounded me saying we cannot deviate from these pre-selected colors as lots of time, effort and money was put into these groupings of 3 to 4 colors per set. Fine, whatever, not unheard of. I asked for the approved colors. They handed me a Sherwin-Williams Coastal Colors brochure. It has like 5 sets of colors and you can literally pick this up anywhere. I heard the approved colors just switch every time one of those new brochures come out too. An HOA that does not allow trucks pickups but allows lifted SUVs. 3. Not an HOA but a building department reviewer once told me that if a client does paint touch-ups in this certain district they can only use approved colors. But, the building was not colored one of the approved colors. They did not budge on this. Meaning they would rather this old building look like absolute decaying into nothing than allow us to touch up with similar paint. 4. Had an HOA reject one of our designs because the front balcony was 6 wider than the neighbor's balcony. They must share a similar design and aesthetic style. 5. There once was a man Dane who wanted an outdoor fire pit to entertain. We designed and he loved it, then went in to permit. But alas the HOA doesn't allow a visible flame. 6. Had an HOA not allow fences, just hedges. But according to an overarching municipal code, there must be a partition that separates the pool from some main walkways for safety kids and whatnot. Most people did the removable kind that sticks into the ground with a net since it's stupid cheap. We built a pool fence around this guy's entire yard and claimed code compliance. 7. We have signs that we put in front of buildings that are under construction to advertise that it is our design and we incorporate the address in that sign so that the address is still on display per county ordinance. I think it is one of those simple signs that looks like a realtor sign. HOA actually more like a neighborhood council, which is a bit more formalized and I believe city or county funded doesn't allow those simple signs. owner had to pay for this very lovely looking sign custom fabricated with wrought iron by a local guy to put in front of a construction zone. 8. Edit, one more. Another comment reminded me of this one. I did a small remodel for a guy adding some outdoor space. When we submitted for permit, the building department rejected it with 2 Google Maps aerial pictures attached, one from 2010 and one from 2017. They noted that many trees that were there before are not out there now and requested that we fill out a tree removal permit. 2 hurricanes hit between then and now which knocked down many trees. They had to pay $500 more for this permit. The implication of this means that every hurricane, almost 600 sq miles of homes theoretically need to pay to remove those trees that were knocked down. I know the other in this list are bad, but this one is complete shenanigans. This one was brand new to me, and so I have yet to look into it further. Like this one takes advantage of disaster victims. In practice, though, it appears this only affect those who want to permit a reno or new construction. Edit a limerick. Edit 2. I remembered a few more. My parents live in a neighborhood with strict HOA rules. However, they are one of 2 houses in the entire subdivision that are not under the HOA, but the people across the road from them are, and they're also the worst kind of neighbors. My parents have an old SUV, like a 2000 Expedition, because they needed something to haul their 5 teenagers around in. Still runs just fine but kinda ugly. They park it on the street in front of their house most days. Neighbors across the road have called the HOA, the city councilman, the police even, because HOA says you're not allowed to park on the street for more than 2 hours at a time. The HOA via the neighbors even tried to get the city to tow the truck as abandoned when my parents went on vacation for a long weekend. Thankfully I was house sitting for them, mooching off their food and awesome cable package, and prevented that. The HOA can't do a thing about it, because my parents aren't in the HOA. My mom's next act of rebellion is going to be to paint their front door dark purple, because it's not an approved color on the HOA list. Also, she's keeping her vote for Beto sign in the front yard forever because signs are banned by the HOA, and also the neighbors across the road have a cruise sticker on their car. Story 11. We can only have 3 types of flags on a flagpole that has to be approved out front: an American flag, a military flag, or a South Carolina flag. One of our neighbors were warned a couple times until they took their cutesy frog flag down. Story 12. Grass had to be exactly a specific inch height. Only white-colored Christmas lights made of white wiring, not stereotypical green. Snow in driveway and sidewalk leading to house had to be shoveled by X width and cleared off by Y time of the day. Edit. Seriously though, HOA had an HMA try to enforce that I had much too old of a car to be in the driveway. Mind you, no rust, always clean, never dusty dirty. Went to court and the judge ordered a full audit of the HMA. It was not enforceable at all. They paid my legal fees, and last I knew they have yet to police anything. Story 13. Our HOA enforcer, aka bully, likes to go around with his cell phone and take random pictures of people's property. If anyone's front yard isn't as good looking as his, then he would send notices. My wife was out there in the spring making the front look nice when she saw the bully walk by and take a picture and walk off. She finished and the front yard was nice looking with flowers and stuff. The next day we get a notice stuck to our door stating that we need to redo our entire front yard with what my wife just did. 2 years ago I was cleaning the living room and I moved the couches around and let one of the dogs outside while I was working. The back gate was shut. Somehow during the time I was working in the living room, the HOA guy came by and yanked the gate open and the dog got out. Didn't notice this until I was done and my dog was gone. I had to search the area quickly because I had to go to work in an hour. Luckily she didn't go very far. When beagles get that scent lock they go after it. How did I who it was him? Got a notice the next day to secure my backyard gate. My neighbor has an open fence area since she has an end unit. She reported that she would be playing with the kids and the HOA would walk by trying to be sneaky taking pictures with his phone. Visitor parking is rarely enforced. When they do enforce it they tow. Yet there are times I see work trucks in visitor spots overnight. I always get my parking pass from my HOA board and put the tag up for my guests. Yet when I come back from a late night movie and I see cars parked in visitors spots with no tags, I am like, WTF dude. But to be honest, I have been here for nearly 10 years and they can't do anything to us legally. Story 14. Limited number of pets. Didn't matter what they were. 2 animals on the property maximum. I've seen that in rentals but never before in a community of homeowners. Story 15. I'm a Canadian immigrant and fly a Canadian flag around our major holidays. I got a letter in the mail from the HOA threatening a fine if I didn't take it down. Never mind the Confederate flag my neighbor has down the block, I guess. So, I attend a meeting and ask the HOA members if any of them have any issues with me flying my flag, and they all said no, except for one of the board members, who was a past her prime stay-at-home mom with a bad reputation for being a nosy. So, flag goes back up and I receive no complaints again, but see annoying momby walking past and giving me dirty looks. It all came to a head when I opened my mailbox one day, and found the flag cut into pieces and a note with the word Trump written on it in red Sharpie. Despite the fact that I had security camera footage, I run a small recording studio out of my house. This dumb denied having anything to do with it. Story 16. I live in an apartment complex where we all have one assigned parking bay per apartment. These bays are sheltered, while the visitors' ones are not. If you have more than one car, then the second car has to be parked in a visitor's parking. People get fined when they use someone else's parking. For several weeks the apartment next to ours was vacant, so its parking spot went unused. One day a terrible storm rolled in and golf ball-sized hail started coming down. I moved my car into the unused bay to protect it. The storm wasn't even over before I had someone banging on my door to move my car. A lady actually braved the hail to yell at me for parking in a bay not assigned to me. Story 17. My friend and coworker showed me the Facebook page to her HOA. They make daily posts that residents can't park in their driveways because it ruins the aesthetic of the neighborhood. The posts contain threats of tickets and possible towing. She paid $350,000 for a townhouse and can't park in her garage because she drives a truck and it won't fit. Story 18. Apartment HOA. The wheels got stolen off my car, couldn't get it towed that night because no places were open. Next morning I'm coordinating calls between the body shop and my insurance when I look out my window and see my car wasn't there. Some HOA property manager had my car towed because it was a danger to the surrounding cars. Luckily my insurance company covered the towing fees. Story 19. I lived in a fairly large family-friendly townhouse community. There was a community baseball field. At least it was set up like a baseball field with the fences and backstop, but essentially it was just a giant field. Further down was a playground and fenced-in tennis court. It was meant to be used. There were dozens of kids playing baseball, football, soccer, or whatever on it all the time. For really no reason they decided to shut it down. Overnight they put up signs to not use it and keep out. If your kids dared to even walk across it, police would be called in minutes. We were playing tennis on the courts one day and police were called. The next day it was locked up with a chain and combination lock. We called the HOA and were told we would have to give them proof we actually played tennis to be given the combination. My parents and a lot of other parents got in long arguments on the phone and at the HOA meetings about why they made these ridiculous new rules. They were essentially told because we can. It became a war in the community against the old ladies that ran the HOA and the younger families with kids. Story 20. There was a lake where my mom used to live, and people started feeding the ducks. After a while a lot more were showing up and people started complaining. Instead of just removing them, the HOA killed all of them. Story 21. Got some nastygrams because my grass was too tall. I hadn't cut it in 2 weeks due to being gone on a trip and poor weather. Okay, not a big deal. So I cut my grass. A week later get dinged for having grass that was too tall. Now I'm confused. How much shorter do you want my grass? Contacted the HOA and asked what was going on and they said my grass was over 2 feet tall. There is green space beside my property that belongs to the HOA that they had neglected to cut since I moved in. Turns out it was their own problem in the first place. TLDR got dinged by the HOA because they didn't cut their own grass. Story 22. After reading these comments, HOA should be illegal in my opinion, unless they're just cleaning a pool used by the community or maintaining a community gym. Story 23. Growing up I lived in a gated community with a swimming pool, and one of the pool rules was that house help were not allowed to swim in it. When I was a kid I didn't really care, but now looking back it was a totally senseless and elitist rule. Why shouldn't the help use the swimming pool if they aren't even causing a scene or harming anyone or breaking any of the other sensible pool rules? Edit. Sorry, I forgot to mention I live in the Philippines, which is a pretty homogeneous society, so no, this isn't racism. This is just a matter of rich people alienating the other half. Story 24. I received a threatening letter to remove my pink flamingo from my lawn because it was an eyesore. The HOA president had political signs on her lawn, so I asked how that's any different. She said if she had to explain then I probably wouldn't understand. Story 25. My stepson lives in San Antonio and his HVAC went out in the middle of August. With 2 kids in the house and 100 degrees out, he got desperate and put a window unit in temporarily until the repair folks could get there. HOA sent a fine since he didn't request written approval in advance for the window unit. Story 26. My apartment complex made people bring their dogs in for DNA testing so that they could compare it to dog on the sidewalk and see who wasn't cleaning up there properly. Story 27. Didn't happen to me, but my friend's family got fined for leaving open the garage while they were mowing. Same family also got fined for having a graduation sign in their yard. Story 28. My parents live in a neighborhood with an HOA that had some insane rules. Could not park a truck in the driveway, grass had to be a certain height, and you couldn't let your grass die. My father was building a deck so he let the grass in out backyard die where the deck was going to be. HOA looked in our backyard over a fence and saw the dead spot and wrote my dad a fine saying it had to be fixed, so he broke out a can of green stay paint. Story 29. My friend bought a house and they threatened him with a $150 fine for not mowing his yard after 3 days of living there. He said he'd be happy to mow it at 3 a.m. when he gets off work, or they can wait until his next day off and he won't wake up the whole neighborhood. They quietly went away. Story 30. Not me, but my girlfriend's parents' HOA is absurd. The other day they didn't put the trash cans back behind the fence by the early afternoon on trash day. They both work full-time and were threatened with a fine. My girlfriend's dad was bedridden for 4 months and they wrote him about once a week complaining that their fence needed repainting even though they knew he was sick. Same thing with not cutting the lawn after 2 weeks during this time. The HOA wrote a formal complaint when they had people over one Sunday afternoon because it was disruptive of potential Sunday afternoon naps. Yeah, those guys. Story 31. I got a notice that said owner will remove toilet from yard. The HOA guy must have driven by during the 10-minute window where the plumber had my old toilet sitting in the yard before he cleaned up and left. I guess the plumbing truck and toolbox wasn't enough for the HOA guy to put 2 and 2 together. He saw that toilet and immediately thought it was a permanent fixture in my front yard. I rented a house in an HOA neighborhood. We were threatened with a fine for using black trash bags instead of white ones. Except we also had trash containers we put our bags in, so someone literally opened our containers to check our bag color. People who run HOAs have way too much time on their hands. Story 32. When I was growing, we lived in a neighborhood with a bats hit insane HOA. We had a trampoline with no cover on the springs, so we got a notice saying we needed to buy a cover. No problem. We bought a standard blue cover the next day, no biggie. The following day we got a notice with a $200 fine that our trampoline pad didn't match the trim on our house, and we therefore had 2 days to remove and replace it. We also regularly got complaints for playing in the street of a very suburban neighborhood with almost zero traffic. We were ages 10 to 15, received a fine for our basketball hoops net being too tattered it wasn't, and countless others. My mom made it her mission to troll the HOA as much as possible. Eventually the old neighbors across the street both died and the complaints notices instantly stopped coming. Rot in, Dave and Kathy. Story 33. We had aluminum window awnings installed, ones that looked good and required no maintenance. Then we received a notice from the HOA that they needed to be removed because only canvas awnings were permitted. Moreover, they had to be an HOA-approved solid color, no stripes, to be determined by the building's exterior color for a proper combination. Story 34. Copy and paste from our fuckho post I made a while back, the story of how my HOA gave me a childhood head injury and killed my cat. A little late, but there were these lampposts all over town along the sidewalks about 6 feet high, and to replace the light bulb you had to take a pointy top off with a screw and a nut. Well, my HOA thought that was too much time, so they used wire. So when I was about 3 I was playing outside, and for one reason or another which I cannot remember, the top fell off onto my head. I had to get 8 sticks. They said publicly that my parents were terrible parents for letting me out of their sight, and it wasn't their fault. They were getting dressed up for a party or a reunion or something, but I remember it was less than 10 minutes, so it was obviously not their fault. Another example was when they said cats had to be on leashes, and it was county law. For reference, there was a lot of middle-aged dog owners who never had kids, so they were jealous that cats could roam free, but dogs couldn't. So they spread the information that if you see a cat without a leash, call animal control, which my dad tried to combat on a local forum but ended up being an uphill battle. Well, one day my cat wanted to go outside, as most cats do, so a college-aged daughter of someone 2 doors down picked up my cat, who was comfortable around humans, and gave her water, which she drank. Now she was given leftover tuna, and cats drink more water to help them digest it. Now this was enough evidence that my cat was a stray and called animal control. We didn't know, and she ended up going without her medicine for about a week, which forced us to put her down. So at 9 years old, I was already fully aware that HOAs sucked. Fairlington edit. Just remembered. These were the same people who thought they could park in an emergency land for ambulances to get to the pool, because they were authorized personnel and cold people, terrible parents, when kids were running through a garden they put right next to a playground. Our condo HOA sent a notice that we are not allowed to have our cat on our own patio, on a harness, under our own supervision. Someone complained he had eaten the grass that lines the patio. Story 35. They are trying to enforce the rule of you can't smoke marijuana on the property, which is fine, except that Canada just legalized marijuana, so they are trying to ban a legal substance. And it doesn't matter if people are smoking medicinally or not, because reefer is bad. Story 36. Living in SoCal at the height of the drought, there's water restrictions in effect, placed on residents by the state of California, such as 1. Can only water your lawn on certain days and times of night, usually post 6 p.m. 2. Can't wash your car in the driveway. 3. Not allowed to refill any lost water in a pool, and some others like that. Parents took care of the grass by watering what little they were allowed to, but it wasn't a lush bright green color anymore. HOA tried imposing a fine of $125 for dead grass and that it was an eyesore. I happened to be the one home that day when my mom was approached with this letter at the door. Told the woman there that she was being more of an eyesore to the property than the grass was. Also sent her the proper info from the state that put the water restrictions in place. Her reply was that she didn't care and wanted everything to look nice and proper. I offered to start watering midday to get a bright green lawn, only if she was willing to cover any fine imposed by the state. Never saw her again. Story 37. I don't have a HOA, but my brother does. He lives in Florida. During a hurricane he barricaded his windows. After the hurricane there isn't much damage to the neighborhood. The HOA mandated to the barricades removed 1 day after the hurricane. Story 38. No outdoor parties. And no disparaging remarks about the HOA board or their decisions. The first one, we just ignored that rule. My lawyer assured me that it was unenforceable and to refuse to pay any fines levied. And the second, since this was a First Amendment case, I went to the board meetings and chewed there for 5 solid minutes. It won me no favors, but I just dared them to try to censor me. They fined me $1,200 over a period of several years. Who knows what it's up to with penalties and interest. This was almost 20 years ago in Dallas. Story 39. My buddy is an attorney who represents homeowners in disputes with their HOAs. He has a case right now where the HOA is coming after the homeowners for living in their homes, instead of renting it out. Story 40. My husband and I had a cute yellow shelf on our condo's patio. We received a letter saying it wasn't allowed. We wrote back and asked them what rule it was violating because we had read them all. They sent us back a copy of the rules with random bits highlighted, such as the beige or other neural colors that was actually in reference to window coverings, and no other colors allowed in reference to pots only being allowed in terracotta. We eventually took it inside, but I've been gradually replacing some of our potted plants with non-terracotta pots. Take that, HOA. Story 41. Not really a rule, But I had an HOA tell the escrow company that they were going to be on me day one because the dude I was buying the house from had been such a, sure enough, day one I had a letter in my mailbox about various bullshit. My new neighbor called them and told them to chill the out, and I cleaned the place up as fast as I could since ultimately I was sympathetic to everyone that had to live next to the place. But still, what a bunch of dicks. Story 42 had a basketball hoop above my driveway, received a letter to remove it. The letter said that since it was a second notice, I would receive a fine of $50. I never received the first notice. When I called to complain I was told to send an email to their billing department, sent the email and never heard anything back. Story 43 not me but my girlfriend's grandparents were fined for having their American flag out, as well as a sign honoring her grandpa's son who died in Iraq. Grandpa basically said you refused to take the flag down. They took him to court to get their money and were basically laughed at by the judge. Story 44 I hadn't power washed my house in a bit, partly because my washer needed repair, partly laziness. I got the thing running and finished all of my house except a little section in the back blocked from view by my shed and a fence with a locked gate. A couple of days later in the mail there was a notice that at 3 a.m. someone inspected my property and found my house needed power washing. Needless to say I was not happy. Story 45 my parents' house when I was fairly little they owned it from when I was 4 to about 13 was HOA. They eventually wanted to paint the house because it had been built in the 1950s and probably hadn't been painted since then. They'd originally wanted to paint it a very reasonable shade of blue or red for a house not an eyesore by any means. HOA refused to approve it. Instead my parents got to use the most horrendous shade of green known to man. That color was an abomination. Story 46 we lived at the end of the street and we had bushes next to our driveway in front of the path leading to the backyards between the homes. We wanted to remove them or trim them because they were super annoying. We were told they are not our property and we can't touch them. A particularly windy day coincided with garbage pickup day and all the garbage from people's bins blew down the street and got caught in the bush. It was an unappealing sight. The HOA tried to tell us that we had to clean it up. They are not our property and it's not our responsibility to clean it up. They removed those bushes a couple weeks later. Story 47 letter from HOA placed illegally no postage in our US mailbox saying our mailbox was too weathered and must be repainted. 2 days later another illegal brochure in our mailbox with independent business offering to repaint our mailbox. Story 48 I've been lucky because for the most part, the 2 HOAs I've lived under have been great. But remember one incident when we used to live in a high-rise. The day after our wedding, we returned home with a car full of gifts, wife's dress, etc. And because we had been so busy saying goodbye to guests at the hotel, never had a chance to eat all day, so we parked out car in a circle outside the lobby and decided to eat sandwiches we'd picked up on the way home at a round table in the lobby before unloading the car. This table was size height of a dining table, for chairs like a dining table. Almost never saw it getting used, other than maybe when somebody was meeting with a real estate agent to put together a purchase offer. Some old biddy from the board comes up to us in a huff. You're not allowed to eat at this table, verified with the doorman, who concurred that was the HOA policy. So we ate our sandwiches off the trunk of our car in the front circle, 20 feet from a perfectly fine table. Story 49 specifically bought in an area of town that didn't have an HOA. However, the neighborhood was so old that it had guidelines about who was considered for ownership which, unless illegal, are still to be followed. No colored people were allowed to buy back in 1950 when my house was built. Obviously, that isn't enforced. Story 50 the rule itself isn't too bad. Maintain your front yard to a certain standard. What is insane is that 2 people let their lawns go uncut for a year, and then brown with no penalty, while if we go a week without trimming a certain bush it's time OT send a letter. Story 51 not me but my parents. They moved into a new subdivision with 2 dogs. Less than 2 months after they moved and they had a fence built in the backyard. Around 5 months after they moved an HOA was formed. The HOA attempted to fine my parents for building a fence without getting a permit from the HOA. They fought the fine and eventually didn't have to pay it, but it took 2 months of fighting them until the HOA understood that the fence was built before the HOA was even formed. Story 52 the city trimmed down a hedge by the side of my house so they could get at an electrical box. My HOA is trying to fine me for not having a hedge that will hide the electrical box. Story 53 America how did this happen? Where I live we have a form of HOA, but it's used for maintenance and insurance. The owners of the unit 7 units on a half-acre block have to pay a fee obviously, but this is just for simplicity and the only overarching rule is no pets, which will probably be changed pretty soon. So how do Americans have themselves trapped in a weird community government that can fine you for not mowing your lawn? Story 54 not me, but my parents. They live in a private neighborhood and their house is within walking distance of the ocean, per the requirements of their HOA. Despite this being a beach community, you are not allowed to have a boat visible in your yard because it ruins the aesthetics again. In a beach community, and if you do have a boat, it has to be hidden in some way and cannot be seen from the street. When I was a kid, we had a 13 Boston Whaler, which my dad kept behind the house, but a couple inches of the trailer head could be seen from the street. My parents were asked to put up a fence to hide the few inches of the trailer, and if they did not, their boat would be towed. Story 55 my parents' old HOA tried to tell me our mulch wasn't the correct shade of brown. First too light then too dark too tan looks black not brown I was beyond over it. So for shits and giggles I found rainbow-colored mulch and told the old running it he could shut the up about mulch or come remove it himself piece by piece. Because I looked at the guidelines and there wasn't a rule about mulch color. Turns out there weren't as many rules as he insisted there were. We didn't need to stain our decks the same colors. Floral bushes weren't banned. Dude was lying and everyone just accepted it. So I began showing up at every meeting, questioning his authority, calling his cognitive function into question, and generally being a gigantic pain in his and bucking his bullshit at every turn. I was 19 and he was 7,000 years old, and head gets so mad at a 19-year-old woman calling every rule into question. My dad ran against him in the next HOA election and won. Dude got so mad he exploded in a rage about losing his authority he gave himself a heart attack in a parking lot. Had to go live in a nursing home, and the HOA where my parents live has been without stupid bullshit since. Story 56. I worked for my stepdad's painting company when I was in high school. Dealing with HOAs was a constant. We'd be in the middle of a job, and some representative of the HOA in whatever neighborhood we were in would come over and start bugging us about the colors or something stupid like that. We even had one guy complain that there were too many people on our crew, including myself. There were 4 people on the crew, which is pretty standard for a paint crew, especially considering that we were painting multi-million-dollar houses that were huge. This was 10 years ago, but I have never been able to figure out why 4 people was considered too many.